Welcome to the Peace of Me podcast. This is your space for all things peace, positivity, and finding balance to live your best life. Life gets busy, and at times it's messy. I'm here to help you clean things up and put peace back in its place. I'll share tips, ideas, interviews, mindset shifts, and fresh perspectives to help you along the way. Hi friends, it's Lexi Lee. If you're new here, welcome. And if you're not new, then welcome back and thanks so much for coming back to the podcast. I'm so glad you'll be joining me for another episode in the Mental Health Awareness series during the month of May. And this is the final episode. I'm so grateful to all the guests who were willing to open up about their personal struggles from death to divorce, financial hardship, mental illness, self-doubt, and so much more. We heard from both men and women on the podcast. And this final episode is very special because we're going to shift the conversation from adults to children. My guest today is a school psychologist, and she'll share her expertise and experience when it comes to our little ones and mental health. Our conversation was very eye-opening, and she taught me a lot about what parents should look for. Guys, this is an episode you'll want to share with every parent you know. And please send this episode to someone. We need to spread the word. Now, please also note that this interview will cover topics that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Joining me for the final episode this month during Mental Health Awareness is Christina. Christina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Lexi. It's amazing to be here, and I so very much appreciate your openness and discussions about mental health during amazing to help end the stigma.
Absolutely. And we're very appreciative that you're here. And especially, I'm really looking forward to just learning more about mental health from your perspective and expertise as a psychologist. So if you could you tell us how long you've been practicing?
Absolutely. I've been practicing since about fall of 2017. That was my very first year. So about 5 to 6 years in the field.
Sure. Now, one thing that you had mentioned to me, we were talking a little bit offline, was that you're not a guidance counselor. So can you tell us what the difference is between a psychologist and a guidance counselor?
Absolutely. So what's funny is I didn't even know what school psychologists were until I entered it for graduate school. I didn't know that my school had one, and let alone where to find one. So I really appreciate this opportunity because I feel like it'll help bring visibility to us and who we are. The biggest difference, I would say, between what school psychologists do and what school counselors do is that we're tasked with the main priority of assessing kids for special education. So what that looks like is we are specially trained in different evaluations and how to interpret those, whether they be evaluations related to cognitive functioning, behavioral functioning, emotional functioning, could be any number of things that a teacher or a parent would be concerned about. School counselors, on the other hand, they have the tasks that are more related to administration. They help with scheduling. They help with general guidance to like maybe a principal and a teacher relationship. They help kind of figure out, okay, these kids did really well in this class. Let's put them with so-and-so next year. So they do a lot more of some of the behind the curtain schoolwork. And some things that we have in common are that both of us are trained in counseling. So they might have their door open at all times to see kids, and school psychs would as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for that clarification because I'm even thinking about when I grew up in school, I remember the guidance counselor, but I don't really remember the psychologist. So is it pretty common for schools to have one of each?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's lovely is the more and more mental health gets talked about, the more people are advocating funds to get even more resources into school. So it might be a social worker, it might be an extra school counselor. Unfortunately, with my field, there's a high degree of shortage for us. So we're often split between schools. But yes, every school should have at least a school psychologist and a school counselor.
Okay. Now, to be a psychologist, how many years of training or education do you have to complete?
Yes. So it's pretty intensive. It was a 3 year. And what made it really intensive was where I went to school was upstate New York, and their program was really, really good. It was one of the best in the country, but they start you off right away in schools. So you're learning what you're doing and practicing it right away almost. So unlike maybe other professions where you do an internship or practice later on, we got going right away. And so it was 3 years, very intensive, a couple credits shy of a doctorate. So yeah.
So it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Now, you also mentioned that you work between an elementary school and also a middle school. So, what ages of children are you seeing?
hmm Yep. Typically, kids as young as 8, they might come into third grade a little bit younger. So my elementary school is grades 3 to 5. So around 7 or 8 is the youngest I would start working with. And I work all the way up into 8th grade kids at my middle school. And typically they leave us when they're around 14, maybe 15 if they were retained earlier on or a case like that.
Hmm. And what would you say, like, which age group or age groups are more open to seeing you for help?
I would have to say that would be the elementary school age kids compared to the middle school age kids for sure.
Hmm. And why do you think that is?
That's a great question. I really feel like with the older kids, they are getting more independent. They are naturally resisting adults more just as part of their maturity process, where it's like, okay, we want to be with our friends. We don't want to be with adults. And, so they're starting to change in every kind of way. And I feel like we're just now starting to have these conversations about mental health and visibility with how to get help, who to go see. But we didn't catch those kids early enough quite yet. I have full faith that we're on the right track to where hopefully later on this won't be a thing. But I just feel like the older kids are still like, oh, I don't want to go talk to someone. I'm going to deal with it by myself. They want to look cool. Everyone wants to be cool. And I think having conversations like this lets kids know that you can be cool and still need help. You still can take care of your brain just as you would if you got your knee injured during soccer practice.
That's a really good point. And I think you're right. I think it's, now more than ever, it seems like before, if you even brought up the thought of, oh, I want to see a therapist, people would just assume something was wrong with you or you were crazy or whatever. But it seems like we're definitely shifting in the right direction of it's okay to say you need help. It's okay to, take care of your mind like you would your body. So
Exactly. Yep.
now, when kids finally do decide to seek your help, are the conversations that they're having with you confidential?
Yes. The same goes for a school counselor. Are typically only able to reveal something to another person if a kid comes in and says they're thinking about harming themselves, harming others, or if someone is threatening to harm them. So that's when we kind of have to step out and maybe engage with an agency or get them evaluated so that we can prevent that kind of thing from happening. But anything
Mhm.
else, as little as it might seem to someone else who asked the kid to go see me, like maybe it was, oh, I during recess a kid stepped on my shoe and it really hurt my toe, and they're crying and they're anxious to interact with the kid, so it might be perceived as small, but even that is kept confidential, and that's just an example.
Okay, no, that's good to know. So then, could parents or even teachers tell you that they want help with a particular child?
Yeah, absolutely. So schools have different processes to handle that. Oftentimes, teachers will just email me directly or come to me directly, but there's also formal referral processes that can happen if a teacher starts noticing maybe an attendance drop or something like that, where they feel like they need to get some kind of formal process going.
Hmm. And you also mentioned that younger kids are more likely to see you than the teenagers. And you know that teenagers they tend to be more independent. So, what behaviors should a parent look for when it comes to their teen, and when should they step in?
Yeah, it can be. I know this could be so tricky to navigate. I'm not a parent yet. I hope to be someday, but I understand that navigating childhood to adolescence is no easy task. So what I would recommend is just being really noticeable of a difference in behavior. So let's say your kid is usually outgoing. They love to play sports. They love to talk to other people. They're very vocal. They got a big personality. But then suddenly they are withdrawn or they don't feel like hanging out with friends or they start saying negative things. I'd say any change of behavior is a good indicator to at least have a conversation with your child. It might not be to the point where you're like, oh gosh, I got to get them into therapy right away, but definitely pay attention to things like withdrawal, saying things, that are scary, saying, looking up things online. I'm a big proponent of parents really being involved with their kids' presence online for a variety of reasons. So just stay connected with your kid, even when they start pulling away from you. Just remember that that's natural, but that you can still have really good conversations with them. Even asking them like, "Hey, what do you feel like your strength is right now? Like you used to play sports. What are you interested in right now? Is it just video games? Do you want to be a video gamer when you grow up?" So just staying in their present in their life and reminding them that you're there and you care.
That's a really good point. And also, like you said, really looking for the changes in their behavior. So if they liked something before and now they have no interest, or if they, almost kind of stay to themselves more than they used to, just kind of looking for drastic changes, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those indicators could mean nothing, but it's always good to just double check and maybe ask your other parent friends that could have kids of the same age, like, "Hey, did your kid do this too?" Just check in.
And I would also think too that even if the child doesn't really want to open up too much, I would still think that they feel cared for because the parent made the effort to ask. That they didn't just let them stay in their room or stay to themselves, but they actually showed they cared by asking them those questions.
Absolutely. And I remember one of the biggest things that one of my professors taught me in grad school is the best way to prevent a lot of scary behaviors is to eat dinner as a family every single night. Make it a routine. It's one of the best ways to have conversations with your kids and to stay involved and to prevent them from engaging in other risky behavior. Because research just is really heavy on times of day that kids get involved with stuff, and later on at night, like starting around 7 is typically when kids are sneaking out or doing whatever.
That's interesting. That's a good takeaway. And something else you mentioned was about, the online presence. And that makes me think of social media and how when I grew up, social media was not a thing, but now it is. And it's everywhere. And kids have phones and they're on all the different apps. So let's talk about online bullying. Do you actually see this affecting kids more than ever before?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say as online presence and social media grow as society in general, what makes it scary to me, in my opinion, is that you have your, classic kind of bullying, what people think of as bullying, maybe someone getting pushed into a locker or something like that. So, what is scary is that that can be co-occurring with cyberbullying. So some of the recent research is saying, that a lot of kids that engage in that are more likely to abuse drugs. They're more likely to be severely depressed. Their anxiety is much higher than those who are not cyberbullied. So I think it lives in their head more consistently than when we look to the older kind of ideas of bullying where, it was at school, but you could get some kind of reprieve at home. Now it's not so much like that. So I think we just really need to dig our hands into how to help this and how to hopefully get some of those rates down.
And I'm hearing a lot about these TikTok challenges. So I don't know if you've been hearing about these too, but can you tell us what these are?
So the ones that I've heard about either through family or just online in general is there was a big trend of destroying school property. So maybe a challenge might be, okay, get out of class and go to the bathroom and rip out a ceiling tile or something like that. And what's crazy is this was happening nationally. So a lot of schools were seeing it and could not figure out why until someone finally linked it to a TikTok challenge. And I think what that mirrors is kind of like the old school, oh, let's all hang out at the 7-Eleven and smoke cigarettes. Like everybody wants to be like other people. We all have this group think. We're social beings. It's driven in our nature and we don't want to look different. And so if that's what's the perceived cool thing to do, many kids who would normally not do that kind of thing engaged in it. So I think that was one of the worrisome effects, is seeing the other kids feel kind of pressured so that, they weren't made fun of, or, oh, you didn't meet the challenge. What are you, a baby? That kind of thing. And so they feel ostracized.
And you mentioned how kids don't want to look different. And that was really like the takeaway as I'm listening to you say this, that's true. Like nobody wants to be the one left out. They don't want to be the one that's made fun of. So even the good kids are participating in things that they normally wouldn't participate in because they don't want to be the one that's getting made fun of. And then you also mentioned that these things are happening in bathrooms. So my thought to that is that because there's no cameras in there? So that's how they get away with it?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think schools have done a much better job in recent years being more present in hallways, cafeterias, more unstructured places in general. But unfortunately, we can't follow the kids everywhere they go. So bathrooms are, yeah, a very popular spot. Not to say that it didn't happen elsewhere in schools, but I think that, kids knew that they could get out of class for a couple of minutes. Teacher wouldn't suspect anything unless they were gone for a really long time. So they could pop out of class, do the challenge, and come back.
Wow. And that just tells you how things have changed just because of online and just it's yeah. My head is shaking over here because I'm just thinking like it's just such a different world. So, but one thing that seems that it hasn't changed, and this is something we talked about offline, but there's still a stigma around maybe some of the parents because the parents might be older, and depending on the generation that they came from, where therapy and seeking help was not a good thing, as we kind of talked about earlier. So, how do we get the parents to feel and know it's okay for their kids to get help if they're the ones that maybe are not buying into getting help in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that the more kids are learning about mental health themselves, the more apt they are to maybe advocate for themselves. But on the parental side, I think that if people focus more of their conversations on the root cause of why someone believes something, instead of like attacking them and starting the conversation off negatively, like, oh, you don't believe in mental health yet? What are you, a loon? Like, catch up with society. It's often more effective if we engage in conversations with our parents in a respectful way and say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's figure out why you feel mental health is not needed for your kid. Is there something, deeper than, you thinking that? Is there something, was there a negative experience? And just having those real open conversations, continuing to advocate the benefits. So when we teach kids social emotional skills, we see better academics, we see better attendance, we see just overall a more cultivated environment of happiness and empathy and whatnot. So if someone's really reluctant, you can always remind them that it's not just necessarily, okay, we're saying your kid needs therapy or they need to talk to someone or anything like that. Absolutely not. It's, we are trying to help everybody because good outcomes start with a healthy mind.
I agree. Now, what do you think a child might say to their parent if they do want to come talk to someone like you? Like, what should the parent be looking for? What would their kid maybe say to them?
Yeah, I think probably it depends on what they're struggling with. So young kids might not have the vocabulary to express what they're feeling. So they might say that their stomach is really hurting a lot at school. And so the parent takes them to the doctor, and the doctor says nothing physical, just might be anxiety. So it might be expressed in like that more somatic type of way, that body type of way. They might say, Mom, Dad, I don't know what's happening, but I can't seem to focus. I don't know what's going on, but my mind feels foggy. You know, they might not have the language to say, I feel depressed. They might just say, I don't know what's happening, but I don't want to play sports anymore. I don't know why. Number of things depending on what they're struggling with. And it's really tricky with more of those internalizing disorders like anxiety or depression because they're internal, they're not easily seen necessarily. So just asking kids, just do a check-in, every day. How you feeling? Is there anything on your mind? Anything you want to talk about? Was there any problems? If there was, how would you handle it differently? Do you need more support? That's what
Hmm.
I'd say.
And I like that you said these kids might not have the vocabulary to vocalize what it is that they need, that the parent really has to kind of almost read between the lines and kind of notice what they're saying and not dismiss it, but look into it further.
Yeah, I think parents know their kids so well that it's almost like a gut reaction, is what I suspect. Like, when something's wrong with one of your own. I think about, since I don't have kids, I think about, maybe my sister. I can always tell when something's on her mind. So just again, pay attention, real close attention to your kid's mood. Instead of just asking them, how was school? Say, did you have a happy day at school? Did you have any stress at school? Is there any problem I can help you with?
I love that. That's such, yeah, it gets a little more granular. That's a great suggestion. Now, I want to just shift gears for a moment and talk about something that's very difficult. And it seems like, unfortunately, we're hearing more and more people who just don't see any other way to handle their situations, and they unfortunately decide to turn to suicide. And we've seen this with celebrities like comedian and actor Robin Williams. There's handbag designer Kate Spade, author and American chef Anthony Bourdain. We even saw it with Stephen Boss, who was also known as Twitch. He was the dancer part of the Ellen DeGeneres show. I mean, there's too many people to name. And I think that most people are shocked that it happens, especially to those people, because they seem happy. They're successful or they're rich and they're smiling on social media and they seem to have everything that they could want, but clearly they're hurting very deeply. So what are some warning signs that we could maybe look for with our children that might, unfortunately, if they're also thinking about suicide as an option?
Great question. Thank you so much for asking me about this, because you even asking and us talking about it is a means of prevention. Opening up the conversation about suicide is a really good thing to do, even though it kind of seems contrary. Some people have the idea that if you talk about suicide, it embeds ideas, when it's exactly the opposite. It gets people to, really think about it and what's going on. It kind of halts that impulse that they might be having. And even just asking someone if they're considering suicide, even though that sounds uncomfortable, is a great way to also prevent some that occur. So pay extra close attention if someone's talking about suicide. So they might say, I feel like a burden to others. I want to die. I feel so much shame and guilt, and I just want to end things. Even if it sounds like a joke, right? Because part of our language is ever changing. It used to be so common to say, "Ugh, if I get another bad grade, I'm just going to kill myself." Even if it sounds like a joke, tell someone. Never keep it a secret. If you're a younger kid that's listening to this, one of your friends might say, don't tell anyone, but I'm really thinking about hurting myself. They will forgive you for telling someone. It's better to try to keep them alive and let an adult know than not to say anything. So pay attention to what they're talking about. Pay attention to their behavior, such as one of the biggest signs is giving away possessions. So they might have a beloved locket that their mom gave them, and they might give that to a friend. They might start making plans and researching ways to die, going back to what I said earlier about the internet and paying close attention to what your kids are looking into. They might display extreme mood swings. So part of suicide oftentimes is depression. That is a huge indicator. They're very correlated. Robin Williams struggled with it, even though he was very good at kind of masking it. Some people even suspected he had a mood disorder where he could, be very elated and then would just swing back down. So pay attention if your kid expresses depression or if they are diagnosed with it. Make sure that you are checking in with your kid if they experienced a friend who died by suicide. Make sure that, again, I'm sorry, I lost track about the mood swing thing. Oftentimes people think, okay, only people that seem depressed die by suicide. When sometimes what can happen is people get extremely happy right before they're about to complete their plan because they feel a great sense of relief. Finally, the pain is going to end. Finally, I see a way out of this. So they might seem really, really happy those last couple of days or moments. And, if they start taking more dangerous risks, if you have an adolescent that's driving and they start driving very fast, or if they start abusing drugs or alcohol is another thing to look into, not just for suicide, but obviously for other things as well.
And I'm so glad you're sharing these because as you're sharing these things to look for, I'm thinking, oh, that completely makes sense. But yet I didn't know any of those before. And it makes sense that, parents should be looking at the history on your kids' computers or their cell phone, have, maybe those parental controls or whatnot, but just be monitoring what they're looking up. But also, that kind of behavior, like you just said, like the happiness right before it happens, like it's just, I never would have thought that. So thank you so much for sharing those.
Of course, I'm such a big proponent of just, even if you could remember, make a little mnemonic for yourself to remember different things, to remember what suicidal ideation looks like. Again, it is such a great means of prevention, and it's not something that has occurred historically. And so I think the more we get educated on prevention for everybody, even kids, in my opinion, because a kid might express to their friend first that they're considering suicide. So kids knowing what to look out for is amazing. I think it's a really good thing to do, even though it can sound like a scary topic.
Now, that was actually going to bring me to my next question, that if kids are more likely to tell a friend about these thoughts and maybe subtly tell their parents, what resources could parents provide to their kids before it's too late?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. My absolute favorite resource for suicidal ideation or even just any crisis in general is it's a texting hotline. It's 741-741. Very easy to remember, and it gets you hooked up with someone that can help you right away. So I know kids usually like to text more, so it gives them that comfortability to just shoot someone a text message, and whatever their crisis they're going through, they can get immediate help by professionals. Parents can express concerns to the school, and we are always partnering with parents. We are resources for parents, so we can provide a variety of community resources. For example, in some different parts of states, there might be a mobile crisis where a team of professionals can come to your house if something's really wrong. And again, just having these conversations and remembering resources that they are out there, they do exist, and we're all in this together. American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is amazing for parents, educators. They even have a teenager section. They're hooked up with the Trevor Project, which helps the LGBTQIA plus population because they are super susceptible to suicidal ideation. So it's an amazing resource I highly recommend.
And you said that text line was 741-741?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay.
And if
Now,
parents want to call, they can call 988. That's also a quick way to do it. Instead of texting, you can call that number. Sorry to interrupt you.
no, that's great. That's really good to know. And then you just brought up another good point, which is it's been another topic that seems to be it's just we're all talking about it a little bit more, and that's about gender questioning, obviously sexual orientation. That's becoming a big topic in the school system, not for the schools, but just it's being talked about more, it seems like. What would you say, what ages do you usually see these conversations or these kind of, I don't know, ideas or questions about whether it's gender questioning or maybe sexual orientation? What ages does that usually start at?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know there's a lot of controversy around this topic, and it's another thing that I always take super seriously. If someone expresses that to me, I never try to diminish what they're thinking or feeling. So I would say that it definitely pops up in middle school ages, definitely according to research, but it could happen in those younger years surprisingly as well. Just as people who are, maybe gay, they report that they knew it at a very, very young age. So I think as young as 5, even people can kind of start feeling like something's not right with the skin that they're in.
Mm. So, how does something like this, whether it's gender questioning, sexual orientation, how does this affect their mental health?
It affects their mental health tremendously. They are more subject to think about, make a plan, and attempt suicide. They're 4 times more likely than their peers who are not in their community. So that's really alarming to me. I mean, we have to take care of our kids. We got to take care of all our babies. We especially have to pay attention to these communities, whether it's the LGBTQIA plus community, minority communities, because they're especially susceptible to these kinds of things. They're more susceptible to bullying, just about any kind of ostracization that one could go through. So it affects them, I would say, in pretty much every domain of mental health. They'll be more anxious about coming to school. They'll be more worried about what people perceive them. I mean, every kid worries about what does everyone think of me, let alone if you're questioning your gender, or if you feel like you're not like everybody else because you're a girl and you like girls. So I think the more we let parents and kids and everybody in the world know that we are hopefully shifting more towards acceptance openness and just overall conversation so that we keep these kids alive so that they can be, they deserve happiness and a full life just like we do.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the LG, and I'm going to say this wrong, and then you said there was a plus at the end. What does the plus stand for?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It is meant to encompass any person that falls outside of what you could consider the traditional uh, gender identification and sexuality. So it can cover people that are pansexual. They're not interested in anybody. They're a person and that's how they're going to live their lives. They might identify as, you know, oh, I just heard one the other day. It's just meant to encompass everybody else that's not the letter before it, outside
Mm-hmm.
of the people that are not minorities. So the straight people, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. So then I guess the next question is, how do parents and teachers but best support kids that are kind of in this space?
Yeah, I'd say, again, try to be as accepting initially as you can, even if you're curious, even if you're like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. Just ask questions, just really let them know that you are a safe person to talk to. And if they don't feel super comfortable with you, you can recommend them to go talk to someone professionally. You can let the school know to have some conversations. And again, just, being curious and being accepting and, trying to gear away from I'm going to kick you out of the house if you're not who I expect you to be. So I'd say, yeah, it's just all leading to this big theme of being open and having these conversations, even if they're hard conversations to have.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we've been trying to do so much on the podcast this month is have those hard conversations and be more open and willing to have them. So this has been such an eye-opening conversation for me today. I've learned so much from you. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and perspective on the importance of understanding and supporting mental health of our youth. So I've asked you a lot of questions today, but Christine, is there anything else I haven't asked you or anything else you'd like to share with us today?
Sure. I just want to close by letting everyone listening know that this is so meaningful to me, and I've gotten into the field because I have my own struggles with mental health. Immediate family members have their struggles with mental health. So this is what it's all about, right? Like giving people these resources before they're adults so that we can hopefully start seeing these statistics go down. And I really think that the more we get our fingers in the dirt with prevention, with anything, whether it's suicide, whether it's behavior, whether it's, mood disorders, the more we set them up earlier, the healthier they're going to be while they're growing, the more they're going to learn strategies, the more they're going to be comfortable and accepting and keep these conversations going. And like I said, in the end, I just think our kids are the future. So why not embed these skills into their school? Why not teach them as part of their education and kind of help facilitate those academics, but also teach them these real life, either critical thinking or emotional intelligence skills?
Absolutely. Let's offer them everything that we can. Oh my gosh. Well, Christina, thank you so much for being on the Piece of Me podcast today. Again, your insight has been very eye-opening, and hopefully the listeners will go away with having learned something and just being that much more knowledgeable about mental health in our youth. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lexi. You are amazing, and I really appreciate this. So I hope you have a good rest of your day.
I've created this space to help you live your best life. If you want to help support the podcast in return, I'd be forever grateful of your support. Please give this show a review on iTunes or share an episode with a friend. You can also join me at peaceofmepodcast.com. That's peaceofmepodcast.com. And stay connected.